This is not about creating election integrity. It is about disenfranchisement and choosing who can vote and who cannot.
A few moments later.
Somalia's electoral authorities have started issuing voter ID cards across Mogadishu as the capital prepares for its first direct municipal council elections in decades under a one-person, one-vote system.
So we have even more updates on the SAVE Act and the battle over voter ID because Democrats continue to be absolutely mask off in their meltdown over this. Not only have we had Chuck Schumer previously referring to it as Jim Crow, but now Hakeem Jeffries is even accusing Trump of attempting to rig and steal future elections simply by verifying citizenship and requiring a government-issued photo ID to vote, to which I first of all say I thought it was impossible to steal elections. I thought we have the most secure elections in the world. But it also begs the question as to what were Democrats doing in elections this entire time then? Because they can sit there and call us conspiracy theorists all they want. Hey, don't you know voter fraud's exceedingly rare? Non-citizens are not voting in elections. These are all conspiracies. But if you're going to get this hysterically upset and threaten to even shut down the government the moment we present these very common sense measures that most countries on the world practice, then it really does beg the question, what are you actually up to here, right? So we'll bring you this. I want to show you how even liberal media continues to be dumbfounded over why Democrats are so vehemently and violently opposed to a policy that is supported by the vast majority of Americans. But I also want to update you on some of their friends over in the third world because you're not going to believe this. As we get the meltdown from many different characters, including Ilhan Omar herself, do you know who apparently has just implemented national voter ID? I'm not even making this up. The country of Somalia. That is right. Even over in Somalia, a country that barely even has a government, they're now doing a national voter ID. Which begs several different questions. You know, Democrats love Somalia so much. Ilhan Omar constantly praises this place. So is it racist over there in Somalia, a country that's basically all full of African people that, oh, you know, they're discriminating against minorities by implementing voter ID? I don't know. It's just, you know, pretty a strange take to make. But, you know, lately, when I've been trying to call out that Democrats are attempting to turn America into a third world country, perhaps I was mistaken, because even over in the third world, voter ID is widely accepted as a common sense policy, so maybe that's not even accurate. I think Democrats are actually trying to turn America into a fourth world country, right? The only part of the world where voter ID is considered racist or controversial at all whatsoever. But anyways, I want to bring you this full story here today, right? We'll show you the Democrat meltdowns, what they're now saying about how apparently the Republicans are trying to steal elections by making sure only eligible citizens are voting, as well as contrast that with what Ilhan Omar's homeland and countless other third world freaking countries are doing on voter ID. So let's get into all of it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our channel, but it also ensures that you personally can stay up to date with all of the latest news coverage and left-wing meltdowns. And that said, so take a listen here to this exchange today on CNN, as Dana Bash points out, as many news hosts have, even the liberal ones, right? 71% of Democrats support voter ID. Why are they wrong? And Jeffries responds by arguing that Republicans are trying to engage in clear and blatant voter suppression. Bash points out, by the way, blue states like Virginia have voter ID and Democrats have won very handily. Jeffries pivots to say, well, Trump is trying to apparently steal the election. Take a listen.
For example, but requiring basic ID in order to vote is really popular. A Pew poll from a few months ago showed 83% of Americans, including 71% of your fellow Democrats, support requiring an ID to vote. Why are they wrong?
I haven't said that they're wrong. We know that states are the ones who are empowered to conduct elections, and every state should be allowed to decide the best way to proceed to ensure.
So hold on. I want to first of all just point out to you how Hakeem Jeffries is clearly uncomfortable. He's like, well, first of all, I've never said that. Because you're noticing a pattern on the SAVE Act and the voter ID issue, because Chuck Schumer did the same thing when we reacted to his clip of this. They can't really argue, right? They're always stumbling. They're always getting nervous. They're kind of making an incoherent argument that doesn't make any sense. Why every single time? Because Democrats have no actual legitimate argument on this. Obviously, voter ID is common sense policy. Obviously, it's ridiculous to say that minorities or brown people are too stupid to get their hands on an ID or something. And again, this is a policy even that some blue states have implemented. So when you can try to throw out whatever platitudes about voter suppression, Jim Crow, but when you really break it down, this argument makes no sense. There's a reason why even the vast majority, 71% of Democrat voters don't see a problem with this. The only problem apparently appears to exist within the institutional top leadership of the party, which for some odd reason seems to understand that voter ID, let's say, would damage and hurt them a lot in elections, but they don't really want to say the reason why. So let's watch basically a bunch of mental gymnastics that they can't even really do that well because they have no argument. All right.
We know that states are the ones who are empowered to conduct elections, and every state should be allowed to decide the best way to proceed to ensure that there's a free and fair election. Here in New York, there are, in fact, voter identification requirements. The question is that what Republicans are trying to do is to engage in clear and blatant voter suppression. They know.
Why? How? Again, it's really hard to make the argument when even your liberal state of New York does the same exact thing. But you may notice and perhaps be deceived by the fact he tried to make this whole, states' rights argument on voter ID laws, basically claiming that, the states are the ones who are supposed to have the authority to control voting legislation in their jurisdictions, which, first of all, is not entirely true. We do also have many national election laws, but even from the standpoint of Democrats, that's not true. I want everyone, I know this is going to be a huge trip down memory lane. I'm sure a lot of people already forgot about this, but does anyone recall what the very first attempt at legislation that Joe Biden went for in his presidency, right? Very first, it was called H.R. 1. Anyone remember H.R. 1? That was also known as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which was an attempt by Democrats to basically nationalize elections and seize control of that for the states and, expand access to all these things like universal mail-in ballots and the lack of voter ID. So just recall that in mind too. These people go, Republicans are trying to nationalize elections. That's exactly what you guys tried to do when you had the power and you wanted elections to be determined your way. And now they're crying states' rights when we basically take their precedent of their beloved John Lewis Voting Rights Act and do the exact same thing. So even then, that's not true either. But anyways, let's continue. So just keep that in mind. Incredibly dishonest. Like, what is that? 5 years ago, around this exact time, this party was vehemently attempting to nationalize elections, and now they're saying elections shouldn't be standardized nationwide.
Know that if there's a free and fair election in November, they're going to lose. In fact, Republicans have been losing every single election since Donald Trump was sworn in January of last year, including most recently decisively in Texas, and of course, losing all across the country, up and down the ballot in the November off-year elections in places like New Jersey or Virginia or New York.
Yeah, and they've been losing. I mean, Virginia is a good example. They have a requirement to show your ID, and Democrats won very, very handily across the way. So why not maybe even just take that off the table and say, okay, maybe not a passport or birth certificate, but show ID?
Well, first of all, every state is empowered to be able to make the decision on their own, and we completely and totally support that. What Donald Trump wants to do is try to nationalize the election, translation, steal it, and we're not going to let it happen. We stopped them in terms of their gerrymandering efforts, where they were going to try to redraw congressional maps in red states throughout the nation, not expect Democrats to respond forcefully, and try to rig the midterms. They failed. We've stopped Donald Trump from being able to federalize the National Guard, which we believe was probably part of some toxic attempt to unleash troops on American cities all across the nation and intimidate people from voting. And we're going to stop him from nationalizing the election. This is going to be a free and fair election. It's going to be conducted like every other election, where states and localities have the ability to administer the laws.
I do want to ask about.
So, yeah, again, this party in recent memory, under the same leadership, just tried to nationalize elections. But even on that point, what even was this? It was just a gigantic word salad. So, he threw out a bunch of words that Democrats usually try to put there, right? Gerrymandering, stealing elections, national takeover, all this. But I don't actually understand Hakeem Jeffries' argument. I don't know. Do any of you? As I will point out again, it's completely incoherent. Hakeem, even if you want to make the states' rights argument that you don't believe in at all, how exactly would requiring photo ID and even proof of citizenship, but Dana Bash only asked you about photo ID, right? How would requiring voter ID nationwide, which many Democrat states already practice, how is that rigging or stealing the election? Where's the rigging or stealing going to be happening? He doesn't specify. He doesn't specify because it doesn't exist. As I said again, it's a ridiculous argument. It's completely incoherent. And there's a reason why Democrats basically just Jim Crow and then try to move on from it as quickly as possible. But let's take a listen here if Adam Schiff, who was also on ABC today, can explain any better as to why voter ID is such a bad thing. All right, let's see.
But given the Republicans have undermined confidence in elections and the integrity of elections, what about the idea of voter ID, of photo ID being required to vote? Are you in favor of that? Can there be a compromise where Democrats and Republicans put forward photo ID as a requirement for voting?
So, Jonathan, what you've just asked is essentially Republicans have created distrust in the elections by making claims of non-existent fraud in the elections. And shouldn't we use the distrust they've created in order to enact a voter suppression law, which is the SAVE Act, which would require people to have a birth certificate or passport, documents that millions of Americans don't have. Almost half the country doesn't have a passport, and I don't know where many millions of people would even find a birth certificate. So
but I asked you
phony fraud claims.
But I was asking you a different question. Photo ID. Because as you know, let's show up, there was a recent poll, there's been a lot of polls on this, but in one recent Pew poll, 83% of adults support requiring photo ID to vote. 71% of Democrats favor requiring photo ID. Is that something that you can support? And if not, why not?
It's still going to be something, Jonathan. It's still going to be something that disenfranchises people that don't have the proper real ID, driver's license ID, that don't have the ID necessary.
Well, at least we got it out of him in the end. But notice how it's the same exact story. Every single Democrat we've watched try to defend themselves on this issue. They deflect, they simply deny, they can't really answer or confront the question directly. Their responses don't really make a whole lot of coherent sense. The host tries to confront him and say, look, no, I'm asking specifically about voter ID. What's the problem? And Adam Schiff finally admits, no, we don't support voter ID, and we don't support voter ID because we think it's something that would disenfranchise people. Now, notably, this is a stark contrast to Hakeem Jeffries, who said that he does support voter ID, but he doesn't want to make it national. But I guess in the end, it always goes back to the same exact thing. And then notice how Adam Schiff tries to say, oh, well, voter fraud is just a Republican right-wing conspiracy theory. So why should we play into that or grant them their moral framework or something? But again, you actually didn't answer the question, right? You're not responding to why it's a bad policy. You're simply basically just saying, well, the Republicans and the fascist Trump regime support this. Okay. I think Republicans also support breathing oxygen. Does that mean breathing oxygen is bad? Should we be breathing sulfuric acid in instead? I don't really understand the point. But okay, you get the idea, and this is continuing on this week, and there just shows no signs of stopping, right? It's going to be Jim Crow, voter suppression, stealing elections, disenfranchisement, all of that to require something as basic as a voter ID. But that said, let's now shift to the lovely Ilhan Omar, because we have some news for her I don't think she's going to like.
Voted on the SAFE Act to make sure effectively, if you are a woman, you are married, you changed your name, and it doesn't match what is on your birth certificate, you are not going to be able to vote. If you are disabled and you can't physically get to an office to register, you are no longer going to be able to register online. This is not about creating election integrity. It is about disenfranchisement and choosing who can vote and who cannot. And it is really important that we create access for every citizen in this country to have the ability to cast their ballot. So I voted no.
Well, how do people who get married or change their name do anything then? Because, hey, the government document's not going to match. It's not like you can simply just bring the marriage certificate and the proof of name change and that we have receipts and documentation of everything in that and there's a way for people to do this. No. I guess if you get married and you change your name, you just can't access society anymore, you know? They're just stuck in their house. They're basically living like fugitives. They can't apply for anything. They can't do anything. None of these things are true. Okay, this is ridiculous. But anyways, so let's kind of add up what we've heard so far. This is racist. It's Jim Crow. It's voter suppression. They're trying to steal elections. And that includes from Ilhan Omar. Ladies and gentlemen, though, guess who apparently has just implemented voter ID? That is, of course, Somalia, who in their attempt to, I guess, start to get on the right track as a country, they're finally implementing elections and what they're calling a form of universal suffrage. And in order to do that, right, guess what they're implementing? The very common sense measure of voter ID, so that way they can get an idea of who's voting in the election. And after all, you know, you don't want people voting twice, or you don't want people, non-citizens voting. You don't want people trying to commit fraud. Yeah. What's a very basic way to mitigate that? A voter registration card, a voter ID to make sure, hey, we know who you are. We know that you voted once. But apparently Somalia is a, Jim Crow colonialist white supremacist state now. Take a listen, though.
Somalia's electoral authorities have started issuing voter ID cards across Mogadishu as the capital prepares for its first direct municipal council elections in decades under a one-person, one-vote system. Printing at the Somali Independent Election Committee headquarters operates around the clock in 2 8-hour shifts, producing an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 cards daily.
Every Somali dreams of a better future, safer communities, better services, and leaders who truly represent us. And that future starts with one simple step: registering as a voter. With your voter's card, you gain the power to choose your leader, shape your district, and make your voice count. Somalia now uses secure biometric technology, no double registration. Your data is protected, your vote is safe. So, how to register? Just visit the district center you selected and complete your biometric capture. It takes just a few minutes, but it shapes our future for years. Don't wait, register today. Voter registration continues in the regions. Your participation is Somalia's future.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works, right? So let's get this straight. In Somalia, third world Somalia, barely functional Somalia, or as some leftists tell us, lovely, amazing Somalia, right? They have a great culture. Have you seen the bananas and rice? Have you eaten the food? It's just wonderful. That's our home. It's the best place in the world. Okay, so over there, in order to register to vote, you have to go physically to a government data center, get your photograph taken so that it can be printed on what appears, according to her, to be a biometric ID, right? That basically scans your face. That's the word she used. And by the way, I would point out, that's the same thing as a real ID. That's what makes real ID different from the old IDs, right? It does like the biometric scan of your face. So even in Somalia, a country, I don't even know where they're getting the money to do this, but even over there, okay, they think it's a good idea to implement the exact same policy. To which I asked Somalia, have you thought for a moment about how this might disproportionately affect your poorest or, most black, I guess, citizens over there, right? The darkest, the darkest skinned ones apparently just don't have a way to actually get over there, right? Have you considered, what if someone is disabled and, they don't have a way to go and go to the government center and take the picture physically? Which, actually, I beg the question on that as well. Okay, so how do disabled people get other types of identifying documents, right? None of this makes any sense. But okay, according to them, Somalia is now practicing a construct of white supremacy. Although we know the reality, which is that, for American and Western leftists, it's different if it happens in a non-white third world country. There it's perfectly okay. It's not just about voter ID. It's about basically everything. If they colonize, if they practice slavery, if they have these past histories of atrocities or even currently are doing bad stuff, if they're racist, for example, if they have what we would call slightly antiquated views on certain social issues, that's okay if it's happening in the third world. And actually the third world are good for doing that. But in America, it's so bad. I'd point out too, okay, so Fox News recently put out this list of countries that practice voter ID, and you can see that many of our neighbors in the Western world, who, by the way, are considered more left-wing than us, right? Keep in mind, progressives are always praising these places as being, so much better than the backwards United States. And you see countries like Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Canada. Oh, they have universal health care. They're so woke. United States is so backwards. Okay, those places practice voter ID. But notice some of the other countries on the list, right? We have places like India, but even look at this: Haiti, Iraq, Pakistan, Palestine, free Palestine. Oh yeah. Did you know, right? Over in Palestine, they're using voter ID. Venezuela, right? So, and now, by the way, Ukraine, and now, by the way, even over in Somalia. So, in other words, in a bunch of failed states, they still see this as rather common sense policy. Although, that's just how it goes. Because when they're over there, it's perfectly fine. When they're over here, no. I'll tell you a story, as a matter of fact. I recently watched a video on one of these travel YouTubers who went to Mogadishu, Somalia, and it's just so funny how this works because, for example, when Nick Shirley or any of these people try to do their videos in Minnesota, what response do they get from the residents? No English, and yet you go over there to Mogadishu, and it actually seems like most of the locals actually speak pretty good English, but, over here, no English. That's how it always works, right? It's different. Once they're in America, suddenly people forgot how to speak the language that they actually know in their home country. They don't know how to get an ID. They don't know how to function, Sure, we all totally believe that. But anyways, that said, though, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. By the way, I encourage you, go check out this video for yourself. I think it gives you a pretty honest, I don't know what this guy's politics are, but it's a pretty fair assessment on, you can actually see for yourself what is Somalia like. I mean, there's some things like that where I'm like, really, they can speak English? And then there's other issues that look, frankly, exactly the same. He gets harassed by random people who are like, no filming, no cameras. He tries to film this fish market, and the guy there is basically not wanting to show the rancid conditions of the quality of food. So he's like, no camera. And it's like, wait a minute. I saw them do that in the daycare and healthcare centers too, right? It seems very, what is it with the no camera thing? But, even this country, even over there, voter ID is perfectly okay. But anyways, be sure to go check this out. But anyways, that said, though, guys, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.